welcome to Smaulgld. In case you missed it, top gold and silver stories for the week ended January 21st, 2017. It was a busy week, and we're not going to cover what you've probably seen already in countless news accounts and YouTube videos about the inauguration, how many people were there, how many people weren't there, about the Women's March. You can find information about that happened during the week on other channels. I want to focus on what the Trump administration means to the Federal Reserve and monetary policy and the economy in general. And we do have some clues. Last week, Donald Trump said the dollar is too strong. And Janet Yellen is out yakking again about raising rates, as are other Fed members. And they're even talking about selling off their balance sheet. Now, this is nothing new. The Fed has been yakking about raising interest rates for years. They've not only talked about raising them, they've talked about being on a gradual path and it being data dependent. And yet, they never did it really. They raised interest rates a quarter point at the end of 2015 after saying they were going to raise rates 4 times. And then 2016, same thing. They promised more rate hikes, gradual rate path, and then they only did it once. Now, there's a reason for that, and it's obvious to a lot of the listeners to Smaulgld, is that the Fed, despite its much vaulted claims of independence, it really isn't. They're political appointees, and they're well aware of that. And they pretend they don't act in accordance with politics, but they do. And now we're going to see that politics come into play with the Trump administration. Now, I'm going to give you some history to kind of show what's happened in the past, and this way we can then relate it to current events with Janet Yellen and Obama, and then Janet Yellen and Trump, and how things might play out. Now, keep in mind, Janet Yellen is not a Trump appointee. It would be like him trying to work with Loretta Lynch, and keep that in mind, at the Department of Justice. So I'm reading a book right now called Inside the Nixon Administration. It is the secret diary of Arthur Burns, who was appointed to be the Fed chair by Richard Nixon in 1970. Now, Richard Nixon was not an economist. Richard Nixon did know, however, he believed that he lost the election in 1960 because monetary policy was being tightened towards the end of the Eisenhower years. And he's right to point that out. I would say it's a fact that monetary policy, loose monetary policy, inevitably helps the incumbent and hurts the challenger. So, for example, well, it doesn't help yes, it hurts the incumbent in the sense that with Eisenhower in 1960, if the monetary policy is tightening, that means the economy is going to contract a little bit, and that helps the challenger come in. Now, in 1980, Jimmy Carter, you may say, well, he lost to Ronald Reagan for a variety of reasons, but one reason he did lose was that Paul Volcker, who was the chairman at the time, and under Carter's blessing, raised interest rates dramatically. And that really harmed the economy, and that helped Reagan draw a wedge between Carter supporters and himself. And then when Reagan became president, Volcker continued the aggressive hawkish monetary policy, continuing to raise rates until he broke the back of inflation. And by the time that tightening policy had run its course, by 1984, things were better, interest rates were going down, and then Reagan was able to get reelected. So Nixon was correct to point out that monetary policy by a supposed independent Fed can harm or help the incumbent. He felt that it harmed his chances in 1960. Fast forward to 1970, Richard Nixon realizes that he's up for re-election in 2 years. He wants to make sure that he has a Fed chairman that isn't going to screw him up by going into a tightening cycle just as the election comes up. Now, he appoints Arthur Burns, and kind of on the understanding that Arthur Burns will do what he says. And so if you read through the book, in the early part of his appointments, Arthur Burns kind of displays in his diary some type of confidence that he's been appointed. He's there as an independent Fed chair, and he writes, The president knows that I know my economics and that he has much to learn from me, and that I am not ready to be either his pupil or his functionary. The president merely asked 2 or 3 questions about money and credit, and we spend time on what he should be doing, not on what the Fed should or should not do. Sounds like the Fed chairman is pretty confident that he's got his role in place. His job is to conduct monetary policy, and the president should just be the president and do what he's supposed to do. Fast forward a few months later into 1971. Here's what Arthur Burns thinks of President Nixon. The president looked wild, talked like a desperate man, fulminated with hatred against the press, took some of us to task for not putting a gay and optimistic face on every piece of economic news. Stop. Now, we've seen, let's bring that to fast forward to the Yellen-Obama years. We heard all through the Obama years with Janet Yellen, solid economic growth, everything was robust, it was strengthening, and that's a result of taking tepid economic data and making it out to be more. It's also just a function of, forget even the manipulation of the data, but the idea that the Fed never came out and said things are bad, they never said that. They always said things were great, and that's because Janet Yellen knew that she wanted to get reappointed by Obama's successor, Hillary Clinton. She wasn't going to say that nothing had worked. It also doesn't make her look any good if she's saying that, we printed $4.5 trillion, we've kept interest rates at zero, and things are terrible. No, so she put that, what they call that gay and optimistic face on things. Well, Nixon in 1971 wasn't too happy with Burns' objective analysis of the economic situation. And he was basically reacting to it. And Nixon's point was, quote, the theory that confidence can be best generated by appearing confident and coloring, if need be, the news. See, and he's basically telling Burns, hey, prop up these economic statistics, make them look good. I mean, maybe they should have been using the words solid, robust, and strengthening back in 1971 instead of giving an objective analysis of what was going on. He explained that he did this in foreign affairs and that we ought to do the same in economic matters. So Nixon is out putting a big spin on things in foreign affairs. I'm sure the Vietnam War was going very well at the time, and he figured that the Fed should basically do the same. And then he mentions Connolly, who was the Treasury Secretary, a most smooth politician, nodded charmingly from time to time. Schultz, always a good boy, didn't say a word. And basically what he's showing here, Arthur Burns, is that the administration will have its yes men, and they're going to go out and they're going to say wonderful things about what the president is doing and how the economy is doing. Well, Burns all of a sudden is kind of surprised that he really isn't there to be an objective viewer of the economy and to develop monetary policy on that basis. He's there to make sure that monetary policy is loose and that he gets reelected in 1972. He doesn't care one whit about his academic or his economic credentials. He just wants to make sure, President Nixon, that Arthur Burns doesn't mess up his reelection plans. As we go further into 1971, he says he talks to the president and he wanted me to know of his deep concern. I told him that I felt sorry about his concern and that he had some real problems to worry about, that he didn't really understand what the Fed was doing, that we would of course not permit the money to supply to decline next year. He seemed reassured. Now, Arthur Burns basically has thrown the towel in. The president has badgered him. He has led a press disinformation campaign against Arthur Burns by this point. He has threatened legislative action to kind of unwind the Fed, all behind the scenes, meant to put pressure, and this is his own appointee, meant to put pressure on Arthur Burns not to do what Arthur Burns wanted to do with Fed independence, but basically to make sure that the money supply was still flowing when the election came around because Nixon wanted to get reelected. Here's how we have to look at this now in terms of Yellen versus Trump. If anyone knows anything about Richard Nixon was paranoid, Richard Nixon, as we know, railed against the press. But Richard Nixon was not a forceful enough personality to really take on the press and win. He used to complain about the press, and the press took him down. Watergate took him down. It was the Washington Post that took him down, and they went after him. And Nixon never really was able not only to get the press on his side, but to batten down the press. For example, what Trump did in the press conference last week, 2 weeks ago, to CNN, pointing a finger at them, telling them to be quiet, telling him to not be rude, and then telling him he's fake news and that his organization is horrible and that BuzzFeed is a failing pile of garbage. Nixon would say that to his associates, would never say it in a press conference. So, using the Arthur Burns Richard Nixon dynamic and keeping in mind that that was his guy, Arthur Burns was Nixon's guy, and Nixon managed to browbeat Arthur Burns into doing what he wanted, even though they have the independents. You now have a showdown between Trump and Yellen. What does Trump want? Trump's out there talking about he wants American industry. He thinks China's ripping us off, that they're a currency manipulator. And as a result, they've made all this money over the years basically illegally. That they've stolen this money because they have managed to manipulate their currency, make their products cheap, send them into the United States. And now what Trump wants to do is turn the tables. He not only wants to say, he said during the inauguration speech, we need to build American, buy American, but he also wants to export American. Well, you can't export American if the Fed is raising rates and the dollar is stronger and stronger. You won't find many buyers. So Trump is not going to be very happy about what Fed Chair Yellen wants to do. Now, Fed Chair Yellen knows that she has said, and all the Fed people have said, they're going to raise rates, they're going to raise rates, they're going to raise rates. They never really have done so. Well, this year might be the year they go ahead and do it. Why? What do they care? They're not going to get reappointed by Donald Trump. And they can say everything was fine until this madman came in and tried to do all these strange things, screwed up monetary policy, screwed up the country. So they might as well go ahead and raise rates. They gain credibility for saying, look, we've always said we're going to raise rates. We think the data says we should raise rates. And now we raise rates. Well, Donald Trump is not going to be like, he's not going to take that sitting down. He will call Yellen into his office, I am sure. Just as Obama called Yellen into the office, just to get an update, so to speak. I don't think so. I think what Donald Trump will do is give her a dressing down, ask her. He already has done this. He already said about a month or two ago that Janet Yellen should be ashamed of herself. What she's done is disgraceful. She's created a bubble. So he's kind of arguing against himself now, because now when Janet Yellen wants to raise rates to pop the bubble, he's not going to want it done under his term. But don't underestimate Donald Trump. He will go, he has already shown there are no sacred cows, that he will go after Janet Yellen publicly. He will say things. He said things when he was running. He will say things as president. And the difference here is, I mean, other than scribbling in her diary that Donald Trump is a nasty man, there's not much you can do about it, because the Fed cannot get involved in a public spat with the president. It would destroy the credibility or the supposed prestige of the Fed. They're supposed to be independent. So Donald Trump would probably be relentless if he sees that the Fed is engaging in a series of rate hikes and the dollar is getting stronger and stronger. Not only do I believe he will dress her down and publicly say things, he will probably also get on the bandwagon for audit the Fed and basically say that they don't work in the United States interest. Quote, America first. And if you take the view of America first, and the Fed is not taking that view, and they're working in collaboration and cooperation with other central banks, as we know they do, then you could see some fireworks. And what could Donald Trump do about it? Well, he can't get rid of Janet Yellen. He can make things uncomfortable for her, and he can ask her to resign, but she doesn't have to. But what he can do, if the dollar gets too strong, that will leave him no choice in his mind to put a tariff in place. Because if the dollar rises to a point, then it's even cheaper for China and other countries to bring goods into the United States, and it's more expensive for the United States to ship goods out. Then he's going to have to put a tariff in his mind. He's going to be forced to do that. And of course, that'll have all types of consequences. So This is a big showdown. The nonsense that happened, whether there was a quarter of a million people, 1 million people at the inauguration, what Ashley Judge said or Madonna said at a women's march, that's all noise. This is the big issue that's coming up, is that Trump is going to try to reindustrialize the United States and make it a domestic and exporting powerhouse. And Yellen stands in his way. The monetary policy is definitely going to be an issue with a strong dollar. Trump has already said the dollar is too strong. Now, that comment wasn't a big deal for most people. That is a huge deal. And then Janet Yellen talking about gradual interest rate hikes. So that's how I see things shaping up. I think Trump is willing to blow things up. Now, Nixon didn't have to blow things up with Burns. He browbeat him, and basically Burns did what he wanted to do. But I don't think that Donald Trump will not have a bunch of tricks up his sleeve if the Fed continues to insist and actually follows through on its plan to raise interest rates, which I expect them to do, because they need to regain their own credibility, and they need, as an institution, to take a stand against a president who, if he comes out and openly tries to tell them what monetary policy should be, they have to stand on their own 2 feet and say, look, this is our plan. This is what we said we're going to do. And we just didn't get around to it. And of course, Trump is going to say that's politics. Why didn't you do it when Obama's here? And he may win that argument of public opinion. And we may see more attention put on the Fed than we have had since Ron Paul began his End the Fed campaign about 7, 8 years ago. So let's look forward to that, because I think there will be a lot of publicity on the Fed and Donald Trump in 2017. All right, let's see what else happened during the week. Gold closed up 1.1% at $1,209. That was the third week in a row that gold was up. Silver also up third week in a row to start 2017. Closed at $17.06, up 1.5%. So the gold silver ratio still hovering over 70. It's at 70.93 to 1 at the end of January 20th on Friday. And you can see it's kind of swinging, has not dipped below 70, has gone as high as 72.8 in the past month. A reminder, if you'd like to help out Smaulgld, you can do so via PayPal and Bitcoin. And thank you very much for those who have donated or plan to donate. So there wasn't a lot of news this week, again, other than news that you probably already know or you can pick up in other places. So I'm just going to go through some of the top gold and silver stories I managed to pull out. Another story of where there's a flood and then it kind of dregs up the river and the gold comes to place. People can go and pan it. You can read that story. That was in, I think that's in Thailand. Yes, we had a story about that happening in Brazil as well, where it's kind of the disaster. There's some kind of golden opportunity in that disaster. We did get some more U.S. Mint sales. They kind of slowed. The U.S. Mint has only reported selling 2 days of selling of American Silver Eagles. They're up to 4.5 million through January 20th. It's a decent amount. They'll probably release some sales numbers in the coming week. The Gold Eagle numbers, 1 ounce, are good. They're up to about 70,000. Not spectacular, but solid, strengthening, robust, right? And the American Gold Buffalo are also okay. They're at 26.5. I do the daily numbers here. We're still waiting on the America the Beautiful coin in February. The Effigy Mounds National Monument coin will be released then. There's more sales numbers. Also, you can buy your gold or silver through Smaulgld. I really appreciate if you do that. Not a recommendation that you do. It's not investment advice. But if you're going to buy gold and silver, on the Smaulgld site and below this YouTube, there are links where you can buy and compare pricing and shipping of a lot of different gold and silver products. And if you do buy, you pay no more, no less through those links than you would if you visited the sites directly. So that's probably the easiest way to help out Smaulgld. It's not going to harm you. It's neutral economically. You're not out of pocket any money. And Smaulgld gets a small commission when you do that. So if you are going to buy gold or silver, please check out the links and banners below and on the Smaulgld site. Again, Fed Williams calling for gradual rate hikes. This all seems like a repeat of 2016 and 2015, where you've got Williams, Yellen, all of them talking about rate hikes for this year, and then only doing one. This may be the year where they do them. for many reasons. Just not just to prove their independence, but also because they lose credibility when they say four at the beginning of every year and they do one. So maybe the next Fed meeting they'll pull one off, and then you're going to see the fireworks because depending on what they say about the next rate hike, you're going to see Trump. He's going to be on Twitter. He's going to be yakking about it, and he's not going to be happy if the dollar continues to rise. Now, the numbers, the economic numbers that they put out, also be interesting to see whether they continue to put the rosy spin on them, or they might, just to give the Fed cover, to raise rates. You would think, well, they're going to now report bad numbers now that Trump is in. Maybe not. Maybe they continue to report the numbers and put the positive spin on them, so the Fed has cover to say, see, the economy's doing well, we better raise rates. Dollar goes higher. The job numbers, I mean, those numbers from people who believe the initial claims is some type of what do you call a indicator of the health of the labor market. Well, they're very low. I don't think it is. I just think there's fewer people in the labor force now, so there's fewer people left to fire. But that's not the point. The point is that the unemployment rate is low, initial claims are low. They can claim this is another reason there's less slack in the labor market. We got to raise rates. So housing starts were good, permits were good, Philly Fed was up. So they can claim that the economy is still rolling along because of all the wonderful things that the Fed has done in the past 8 years. And so they need to kind of put the brakes on. We don't want this to get too hot here. We've created a monster. And that's going to cause the dollar to go up. Now, you also have, we didn't mention at the top of the show, you got ECB. Now, normally, I would think that if Hillary Clinton had been elected, they would not be talking about raising rates. They don't want the dollar to be too strong because a too strong dollar means you're not going to get the inflation that they want. And that's what the Fed says they want, because you make the dollar strong, you're not going to get the type of growth that they want. However, the other reason not to raise rates is ECB left rates alone. They're not going any higher, and Draghi has indicated that they're not interested in slowing down what they've done. They stand ready to increase their QE in terms of size and or duration. So it's not the time for the United States to stand out. While all other central banks are at negative rates, zero rates, they're doing quantitative easing of their own. For the U.S. Federal Reserve to be raising interest rates and selling off their balance sheet, that would just make the dollar just massive. And they definitely, they would not want that under normal circumstances. But again, Donald Trump is in. Here's a story: Donald Trump gold and the cognac effect. Donald Trump, I don't know if anyone noticed, he changed his Oval Office. He put in the curtains. He put in, they were purple, I think, under Obama. First thing he did was he had gold ones installed. So I think there's going to be some type of interest in gold, not just from the monetary perspective and as a safe haven against the turmoil, but also just because of jewelry and ostentation. And Trump is a gold, in terms of style, a very much a gold guy. There were two stories of pizzerias, not Comet Ping Pong or Besta Pizza, but these are, I think, were in New York, New Jersey, making Donald Trump pizzas with gold leaf and caviar on top of them. So I think the president will have some type of influence on the style, and his wife as well, a much more ostentatious style than the Obamas. U.S. Mint sales again. See, they didn't sell. There were many days during the week. They only sold one day where they released sales figures for American Silver Eagles, whereas the Gold Eagles, they were reporting sales every day. And they finished the week at 70,000 American Gold Eagles. Here's another one: Fed shatter. Fed's Philadelphia Fed President Harker. 3 moderate hikes this year is appropriate. Again, it doesn't sound dramatic, but again, last year they didn't do it. They said all this last year, but they didn't do it. This year they're saying it again. Let's keep an eye on it. I think they probably will do it. And then they can always blame Trump for something he did or said. That's about it for the week. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Remember to subscribe to Smaulgld and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you.